What up? What up? It is Monday, and today we are going to whip through and look at the Fibonacci levels on a couple things. We're going to start with the S&P 500. We're going to look at Bitcoin. We'll look at some major players like Apple and Nvidia, Microsoft, all in the tech sector, pulling back a little bit. Also, a couple real estate stocks, and then PayPal. PayPal has released its own coin. I believe it's a stable coin, PYUSD. Little bit of noise there, but we're just going to follow up on PayPal just because like before, I had speculated that it is a big tech stock that has seen tremendous downside and is still at the really low end. And by the looks of it, might stay there. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So S&P 500 definitely got a little bit of a pullback going on. The top of around 4609 was down about 3% and is currently down about 2%. We're going to pull down the Fibonacci levels down to the October low, October 2022. And we see that if we're above $4,041, which is quite a ways away, we can still be in a bull market. Obviously, if we were to break, we'd have to lower the angle of this a little bit because we're not going to go straight down to it. But even if we were down at 4,000 by I think October would be a reasonable time, even though that would be like a pretty ferocious crash. It would still be in a bullish formation. Scare a lot of people, but if that line holds, it has to hold, and we have to bounce off it. Even though we come way down, that would still be bullish. The next marker I have on here, well, actually, probably the first marker that it would hit earlier is this 43 and a half, 43.40, which you can see we've already kind of bounced off it. So if you just look 50% from look at these two zones. If you pull this Fibonacci sequence, let me pull it down again for you. So from the recent high to that low, you see we bounced exactly off this. And then if you pull down from the high to that midpoint, we see we also found support again at this 50% line. So these are significant points that you can find pretty easily just with this Fibonacci sequence. So this 43, it's 43, I'd say between 4,300 and 4,350 is an area that we could easily revisit. I'm not sure we're going to get that far of a pullback, but if we do, if that holds, that could be an opportunity. If it doesn't, if it's time to, if you get fearful, I would say the time to get fearful would be if it breaks and then you see it basically hold as resistance. But if it comes down, tests, and bounces, you probably won't necessarily be able to buy exactly here. I know I probably won't be able to. I'll be a little bit worried. But if you see it bounce and it gets up in any of this area, there's a good chance that we go to a new high and potentially an all-time high because we're really not that far away from an all-time high. Bitcoin, let's do the same thing. The recent top was just under 32,000. I got it at 31,972. Pulled down to the November 22 bottom. Trying to get that here, and that gives us kind of like our fail safe, like maybe eject moment of 23.6. Again, now say we were to crash. These are the levels that are important because if it bounces here, then you can feel like maybe you're a genius and you got some real good buys. If it breaks here, obviously you got to expect a bounce at some point. But if it breaks, that shows weakness. And if it bounces, I would not expect it to bounce all the way back up. I would probably expect for it to hit some resistance somewhere in here and see some more downside again. It wouldn't necessarily be the end of the world, but that's a line that you really want to stay above. And the first line of defense is going to be in here at the 27.8 range. Maybe instead, if you don't want to go to that 50% mark, if you just want to go to the actual recent area of support, and we move this up from 27.8 to more like 28.4, which we're very close to. And you can kind of see that maybe we already hit that and bounced off of it. But obviously, when we're in this downtrend, it feels like it'll never end. It feels like we're just going to keep on going down. So maybe you draw that trend line. And if you see if we push through sideways and hold this support, then we can be off and running a little bit more. If 28 24 to 28 2-ish fails and then becomes resistance, you know, more downside is possible. 23,000 is, I wouldn't say likely, but it's certainly something you should consider. Apple's seen a pretty big pullback. So this is interesting because I believe this hits right on some of these points. Topped out around 200, 198. So we've got this 50% down here, 161. And we're right now on top of, and actually a little below now, this 179 marker. So that is definitely showing some weakness. Now, I would expect there to be a bounce, a pump at some point in the not too distant future. But it's interesting now that we've gone below that 50%, if the we're about to put in a lower high, which would confirm further weakness. So I would think that there's also potential here to bounce, but it might not be able to continue. So I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad time to buy Apple, but in the short term, if you're buying and just planning on holding, you might not reach some of these recent highs, which I think may even be the all-time high. I'm not exactly sure, but the recent highs. Once you break this level, now it could, because these aren't the most precise. So we could be bouncing, like we could be getting a bounce right now from that level. Like that's not that big of a margin of error. But as of right now, especially if you see some more downside in and around here, that would definitely show weakness. Again, probably a bounce is likely, but I would think that there's a good chance it was a lower high. Um, just reading off of this chart. Now, if the macro and the whole market goes a lot more bullish um, recently, then Apple's obviously going to move up as well. Nvidia, less of a pullback, but definitely showing some signs of slowing down, which is it's like a freaking moonshot. So this could be a good time to get in. But if we look to a little bit, I want to bring us back all the way to October 2022, and we've got this midway point of around 296. Again, bounced right on this gap up. That gap could be because of news, could be because of earnings, but it also occurred on the chart. Like it also occurred exactly at that midpoint from where it was going, and that's why you potentially look at this next midpoint and say maybe it'll pull back to 387. That doesn't look unlikely right now. So before then, if you think no, it's not going to retest that, because there's plenty of times where it doesn't retest every level. If it just wants to slowly move up, then you just DCA in. If it comes down and it bounces and starts to move, and especially if it bounces off and breaks this trend line, if this trend line holds for a little while, if it breaks, if it gets the bounce here and it breaks that trend line, then there is obviously some strength in the stock at that point, and could be heading towards all-time highs because it's be multiple bullish signals. Let's look at Microsoft also pulling back, and we'll go to here. We get around 290 as the midpoint, and this is sort of similar to Apple in that it is hovering right around that first line. That if it all plays out in straight lines, you'd love to see it just tag these midway points and keep going. Doesn't always work out like that, but it could work out like that. So keep an eye on it in that manner. I'm looking at DHI, which is one of the largest retail residential construction companies, and just because everybody's concerned about housing, so as long as this stays somewhat bullish, if the construction companies are making profits, it means there's a lot of demand for housing. Everybody thinks the housing market is going to collapse. It probably will collapse eventually, but I do think that DHI will be sort of one of those things. Let me zoom out a little bit. If you go back here to this is basically the great financial crisis, 06, 07, 08. And you look, DHI topped out and started to show a lot of weakness in middle '05. So it kind of double tops the last shot, that it really hit some of its top value was in January '06. So if you overlay the S&P 500, you can see that it topped about almost 2 years, 18 months, 2 years before the stock market topped out. So I'm keeping an eye on DHI just to see, if it starts to show some weakness and it pulls back and it starts breaking some of its 50%. I'm probably not going to be invested in DHI, but that shows that the housing market is having some trouble. Lennar, I'm not exactly sure how to say it, is another construction company. So I'd like to just keep an eye on some of these levels and say, if it has a nice healthy pullback and hits some of these things, like if it goes from 133 to 115, that's fine. If it starts breaking 115, if it starts breaking 97, um, that could be a telltale sign that housing is in trouble, and that usually is not good for the market overall. PayPal, I mean, it's just the only reason I'm even interested in PayPal is that some other charts have done some similar things and then bounced back. So I showed in another video that Facebook had like a 70% pullback, and PayPal has also had an 80% pullback. So I don't know if it'll ever get back to 310. In fact, I'm almost positive it won't. But I do think that in the long run, 180 is not in the cards, but there is potential for it. Again, like if you just look like right at that 50% mark, a lot of action going on, and then obviously like continue to fall. But you could have potentially predicted that it was going to go 80% because when it was down 50%, it had a little bit of action here, and then that didn't hold. But if 180 isn't possible, I think 120 certainly is, and that would be 90% gain. So again, not sure that'll happen. Not sure it may go lower. But I just don't think that PayPal is going to completely fail. It's got a little bit of positive news. Well, I don't know. It depends on how you look at it, because they're getting into the crypto game. They're launching a stable coin. So today it's up a little bit. Um, it actually did break this downtrend, and you'd like to see when a long-term downtrend like this gets broken, you'd like to see it come back down and retest it. It did not test it. In fact, it broke right back down through it. So we're going to keep an eye on it now and see if this um, trend line continues to hold as resistance. And if it does break above it and retest and bounce off it, then this is probably an opportunity to just maybe throw a long shot bet on it. Not a lot of money, just toss a little bit in there. From completely amateur perspective, I just feel like PayPal, there's a good chance that the federal government kills it. They've launched the Fed now. A lot of crypto is trying to take the place of this payments system, but I feel like PayPal does have some type of bounce in it. It's not necessarily going to be the company that leads the way, but if we get an overall bull market, PayPal's still very low, and there's potential there to just make a profitable trade. All right, that's all I got for now. We will see you maybe later in the week, maybe next week.